The main headline out of yesterday's DCMS Select Committee, or the main headlines out of that Select Committee hearing with Samir Shah, the man likely to be the next chairman of the BBC, concerned Gary Lineker's posts on the platform that we used to call Twitter and whether or not they breached social media guidelines from the BBC. But there was another interesting and important story, and it's this. Did a member of the BBC board attempt to influence the government so that it appointed a particular Conservative politician to be the next chairman of Ofcom? Ofcom regulates the BBC, of course. That's an allegation that is in Nadine Dorry's recent book, The Plot. And it goes like this. She says that Sir Robbie Gibb, a non-executive director of the BBC, who used to work at the BBC running political programmes, then left to work for Theresa May and is now a non-exec on the BBC board, met with her to make the case for Stephen Gilbert, a Tory lord, to be the chairman of Ofcom. If that did happen, it's worth saying it didn't work because the chair of Ofcom is Lord Grade, Michael Grade. He got that job after a very long process in which other candidates, including Paul Dacre, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Mail titles, was interviewed. Let's just hear that moment from the Select Committee yesterday when Samir Shah, as I say, the likely next chairman of the BBC, is being interviewed is being asked questions by Kevin Brennan.
I know nothing of this story. I have no evidence in front of me. I don't know. I can't make a judgment call on...
Okay. You're telling me, I think, that you don't know whether it's true or not. Would you like to find out whether it's true or not? Is that something, as chair of the BBC, your curiosity might lead you to want to find out whether it was true?
I will certainly have a conversation with Dame Ellen about it.
If it were true, would it be appropriate behaviour for a member of the BBC board to behave in that way?
I would be reluctant to answer hypotheticals that if it were true.
It's a really easy one. It would be utterly inappropriate is the answer, wouldn't it, for a member of the BBC
prejudging board? What the evidence actually is, and I would wait for the evidence to come in front of me and talk to people before I come to a judgment based on a if point.
That's Samir Shah talking to Kevin Brennan MP. We have approached Sir Robbie Gibb but not heard back. Let's speak to Alan Rusbridger, former editor of The Guardian and now editor of Prospect magazine. Alan, good morning.
Good morning.
So you wrote to the BBC's acting chair, Dame Elaine Kloss-Stevens, about this issue, and her response said that she was satisfied no breach of the board's code of practice has taken place. And she says at the end of her letter to you, rest assured it's important to say there is no indication that the BBC has attempted to influence this process. Are you now satisfied? Because presumably not.
There are two things wrong with this story. One, and I think we can take it the story is true because I've given 8 different people the chance to deny it. No one has. So I think it's true that Robbie Gibb, as a BBC director, tried to fix the chair of the regulator, which is just completely improper. So that's clearly wrong. But the BBC's response has been really woeful. I tried doing what journalists should do, which is to fact check their story, and got nowhere. The BBC just wasn't interested in engaging at all. And so I wrote to the acting chair, as you say, Dame Ellen, who said, well, I've asked Robbie, and he says it's not true. That was the end of the matter. So it's the original sin, and what looks very much like a cover-up.
On the question of it being improper, if it is the case, as you say, it's not been denied yet, that a BBC board member did advocate for a particular individual to become chair of Ofcom, the regulator, can you spell out why is that A, unusual, and B, improper in your view?
Well, the BBC is the regulated party and Ofcom is the regulator. So in any walk of life, any industry, for somebody on the regulated party to try and influence who becomes the regulator is clearly improper. And that's why it's wrong. And that's why it seems to me if that's what Robbie Gibb tried to do, and as no one's denied it, then the BBC has very serious questions to answer.
And on the specifics of him, Sir Robbie Gibb is a non-executive director. He's not chairman of the BBC. The BBC's often had chairs who've got a political heritage. Chris Patton was a Tory, Gavin Davies was a Labour figure. But the idea was always that when you work for the BBC, that's where your loyalties are 100%. Is one of the things you're writing about and concerned about that isn't happening in this case, that you, in effect, with a particular individual have split loyalties? Of course, an individual we'd love to speak to about this issue, but is that your concern?
Well, there were further questions that were asked of Samir Shah yesterday about various other allegations about Sir Robbie Gibb and his alleged interference with BBC programme making and appointments But that was not the main point of my focus. I mean, the Nadine Dorries book goes on to make the shocking allegation that she ignored both Gibb and the other Downing Street aides he was obviously working in concert with. So it wasn't just Gibb on his own, and recommended grade. And she claims in her book that during the course of the evening, having recommended grade to Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, somebody within Number 10 switched the advice to change it to Lord Gilbert. Well, that's a very shocking claim.
It's worth saying that, I mean, Grade, in the end, did become the chair of Ofcom, and Boris Johnson had advocated for Paul Dacre to become the chair of Ofcom. That also didn't happen. What does that tell you? The fact that it ended up with Michael Grade getting the job, what does that tell you about whether or not the process is, about how much reassurance people can take that there are decent processes in place?
Not much. I think the process was rotten from the beginning. The moment Johnson announced that he wanted Paul Dacre there, I know for a fact, because I've spoken to people who would have applied for the job and who just didn't because they thought, well, this is a fix. So the process was really flawed. But I mean, according to Doris's account, she then rang Boris and said, you need to know that this has happened. And Johnson, to his credit, said, OK, well, I will back my Secretary of State. OK,
Alan Rusbridger, thanks for your time. Let me read you the BBC statement. A BBC spokesperson said, because we obviously approached them about it, the BBC board doesn't take a view on who should be the chairman of Ofcom. The appointment of the chair of the regulator is not a matter for the BBC. It's a government-led process, and all inquiries should be directed to the DCMS.